the notion that we're knocking away the supports of what the country was built upon, and not in an intentional top-down way, but an organically developed way over many centuries. A couple of examples hit the news recently. Number one, in the home of our national church, Canterbury, I think the Christ Church University has just removed English literature as a course to study because there's not enough take up. This is also where the very famous Chaucer's Canterbury Tales was written about, and as a pillar, a cornerstone of national culture. But as we were talking, you reminded me of a conversation I had with one of your colleagues very early on in the podcast, and he's over in the business school. And I got him on because he was talking about the need to inculcate an epistemic humility, which is, for most ears, a sense of you don't know it all. And he particularly was focused on business students like MBAs, because, if anyone's worked with an MBA, they can be pretty cocksure when it comes to how a business should be run, but they might not see the bigger picture. And I thought, well, that's an interesting concept. And what I also found interesting, though, was that it was being applied in a way that was not particularly humble, insofar as the ideas to inculcate humility were getting them to focus on the solving of global goals like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which to me seems like an incredibly a hubristic thing to think about, the idea that you can just go across the world, you've got this one take-off-the-shelf goal, which you're going to apply to any geography and people, and that's going to be a success. I don't think that breeds humility, but the reason why I bring that up is, in that conversation, I said to him, what you're doing there, there's a noble goal for sure, but where has it been lost in universities to try to bring about the next generation of torch carriers? And I brought up the example of the film Chariots of Fire, which was about the famous runner from Edinburgh, well, from the Highlands of Scotland, called Eric Liddell, all that famous music. And in there was a Jewish man called Howard Abrams, and he was a bit of a renegade type. And there was a scene with the Cambridge Dons, and the Cambridge Dons are bringing them in on their inset day, or whatever it's called, and said that the role of us at Cambridge is not just to develop a student, we're here to create an Englishman. And that's gone. It's gone, as I know people like Connor Tomlinson put it, we are now just a free economic zone for all of the world, and so we're like a big duty-free lounge. And this sense of not trying to pass anything on, not trying to develop the character and to pass that on, whether it's through literature, whether it's through character formation, we don't even talk about that anymore. It's about GDP and things that contribute to STEM.
Yeah, I mean, as far as education is concerned, which you started talking about Canterbury there, these courses are being closed down because the model doesn't serve them, right? Every university prides itself on being global, international, all of those things, and every traditional subject is at the mercy of the decolonizers, for example. And it's also at the mercy of theory. So the idea that you can go through an English literature degree without really reading, more than a handful of novels, but you spend all your time reading feminist theory or post-colonialist theory or gender theory or Judith Butler or whatever it is. You can either read all of those stuff and not really read any novel. You don't really have to. That is very sad, and it negate. What am I trying to say here? Because I just want to be a bit careful. There's a sense that the arts, social sciences, and humanities I think, are in such trouble. I can't really see them existing in universities in 10 years' time in the way they exist at the moment, right? Because they're completely interchangeable. If you're reading history, all you're going to learn about is post-colonialism and feminism. If you're reading drama, then you're going to read exactly the same thing. It's a sausage machine in which people are just coming out with exactly the same ideas. It used to be about free thinking. It used to be about engaging with texts. Now it's applying a set of pre-cooked ideas to texts, or not, as the case may be. You might not bother with the text. You just engage with the ideas on a very shallow level, because they're actually quite shallow ideas. Excuse me, that's one thing. The other thing is the market. Okay, so domestic students, English students from Britain don't bring in that much money. Okay, so universities tend to focus on international students, right? But what happens is they don't get international students in great numbers. What they tend to get is Chinese students in great numbers, right? So our students our universities are becoming Chinese finishing schools. You take any university and the MA students there, if it's a good university, the vast number of MA students there are going to be Chinese, okay? Because they pay a fortune to come over and they want to come. Now, the Chinese students are lovely. They're really, really nice. They're fantastic, people. But the courses are being geared towards Chinese students. And something really weird is happening in higher education. You've got the Chinese Communist Party, one of the most brutal dictatorships in the world. And we are educating their children. And we're not educating our own children, because they're not going to university in the numbers that they did, or they're going abroad, or something else is happening. And that's happening especially in the arts, social sciences, and humanities. So we're not educating Englishmen, we're educating Chinese kids, And again, I'd reiterate and say, certainly in various institutions, the Chinese kids, they're fantastic. They're wonderful kids, but we need to educate English people.
Yeah, well, there are lots of people talking about that mismatch between entrance requirements, whether you're foreign or national, huge disparities, and obviously much lower barrier for barriers to entry for foreign students who pay 3 times the amount. I wonder if we start to try and pin the moment things started to change. So you joined academia back in 1999 before you left this year. So 25 years, and that's a couple of years after Blair, who we've talked about, and he brought those great reforms in. But it was also the point in which students had to start paying to go to university. And did you? What was the profile of student and approach to education like then? And do you think, looking back, that if there were any remnants of the old order there, 2 years into the Blair premiership, do you think that was ultimately what set us off down this track of all of these social sciences, the deconstructionism being rolled out on a big scale, and then ultimately creating the people who ended up populating our media institutions and all of our other institutions of influence? Was that the critical moment, or is that too much of a simplistic view?
No, I think there's something in it. I'm not going to talk about particular institutions. Just talk generally about the sector, but I think there is something in it. I felt reasonably comfortable in the sector up until about 2012. Okay, I felt as though I had a future. I was a bit different in the sense that I wasn't radically left-wing or anything like that. But I was certainly a libertarian, and there was a sense of libertarianness about education. It was free thinking. To a certain extent, it was still a marketplace of ideas. Okay. I think that the Blair thing of getting, what was it, 50% of people to university, or whenever it was, of, really upping universities, the post-92s, getting, it was before Blair, but the post-92s, turning the polytechnics, which previously had worked very well as vocational education institutions, into research-driven kind of, on the coattails of the Russell Group and the Red Bricks. I think that was catastrophic. I think that's catastrophic. I think throwing so many people into an education system that just couldn't cope with them, because you just can't have so many people in an elite education education system that's supposed to be educated the best, right? I think what happened was that everything dumbed down massively. So you weren't dealing with small numbers anymore and trying to get the best out of an intellectual elite. That kind of, that whole approach changed. So you were just dealing with large groups of people and herding them through. Because as you said before, they were customers. What the customers tended to do was say, well, why aren't you getting me through with a 2-1? Your teaching isn't that good because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. I'm a customer, so I want a first or a 2-1. And at that time, what you began to see was an inflation of grades. And I remember one year in an institution when I first started teaching, I was flabbergasted at the number of firsts that came out, and I was flabbergasted at who was getting the firsts. That was the change. These customers almost pay for these degrees, and they were coming out. It was quite depressing to see, but it was round about, as I say, 2012, 2013, 2014, when that again changed into something else, right? And it was this idea that if you don't agree with me, or you don't have a particular set of ideas which are the accepted set of ideas, you're a pariah, right? Now, education has always been left-wing, and it's always been a bit crazy and all of that kind of thing, but not in that way. It became quite an uncomfortable place for someone like me, right? Then that became more and more marked. So this sense of the good people, we are defined by our politics and what we think and our way of life. And there was a real amount of snobbery to it as well, cultural snobbery, huge amount of cultural snobbery. That became more and more intense. So by about 2019 or 2020, when you had BLM, then you had lockdown, then you had trans, and now you've got Hamas. All of these people kind of coalesce around these things. And it's, as I said before, it's this kind of oppressed versus oppressors. And if you're not on the side of the oppressed, then somehow you need to be gotten rid of. You need to go away because you're harmful. Okay. Irrespective of actually what the evidence is, what the historical evidence is, or what the empirical evidence is. So that kind of burgeoned and burgeoned and burgeoned. I'm talking about education there, but I think you've talked about your experience in the corporate world. I think you can map that onto the corporate world quite easily. Yeah. I think you could absolutely map it onto the media world, without any doubt. But you've also got things like the civil service. And you've also got things like the Church of England now actually not dealing in Christianity anymore, but dealing in this new religion, dealing in this kind of cult-like obsession with gender and race and reparations and the environment as well. So all of this stuff, it's a changing of the goal. It feels like we've been in a kind of liminal space for the last few years, moving from one metaphysics to another, one way of being to another way of being, and that shift is going ever faster, and some of us are really fighting against it, and not many people want it, but it seems to be happening anyway. We're going from one age to another age. In other words, the 21st century is kicking in, and I'm looking from my age of 53, and I'm looking at the rest of the century, and I'm thinking, my God, I'm glad I won't be here for most of it.